Okay, hi everybody. This is our third video on Damp and Mould Masterclass. This one I want to make it about the new Awaab's Law that's coming in October of this year. Okay, so Awaab's Law created following the tragic death of young Awaab who died from continued and long-term exposure to mould and other, no doubt, other health related issues connected to the root cause of the mould growth in his property. Basically, Awaab's Law places quite strict timelines on social landlords to identify and eliminate hazards, including damp and mould. And obviously, the initial implementation is all about damp and mould. But it also requires social landlords to, and I quote, prevent reoccurrence. And this is very, very important. In order to prevent reoccurrence of damp and mould, the root cause of the problem has to be addressed in each and every property. And therefore, the root cause has to be accurately understood, and the most appropriate or the right treatment needs to be specified and implemented. Okay, so if you read through Awaab's Law, you can see it's quite clear that there's a sort of key and main underlying assumption in this area, and that assumption is that damp and mould problems must originate from some sort of defect or some sort of problem with the building itself. Okay, and this is a very important point, because obviously structural defects and so on, well, of course, if you've got a hole in the wall, that may well allow moisture to come in. But the fact is, the most common root cause of damp and mould is actually nothing to do with a building defect, and relates purely to the performance of the building itself. And in many cases, the building would get a sign-off, if you like, from a building regulation inspection in the key areas. And what that simply means is that in certain areas of the building regulations you can comply, and yet the property will still suffer. And this is why so many damp and mould problems end up getting misdiagnosed, because there is a industry-wide assumption that if you follow the building regulations, everything's going to be okay. And that's absolutely not the case, okay, in virtually every property in this country. And the key area of the building regulations is the ventilation. Now, I've said numerous times in the past, I'm not here to educate people, and I will not go into detail on these videos about precisely why. This is obviously our IP and knowledge. Everything that I'm explaining is out there in the public domain. But the fact is that the understanding of the true root cause is so poorly understood by every stakeholder group across the industry. This is what leads to misdiagnosis, where the sort of general assumption is that they're looking for some sort of structural defect or some sort of defect in the property. And then when action is taken to fix any defects that might be found, well, of course, that's not going to have any effects on the root cause if it's a building performance related problem. So, as a highly experienced and expert surveyor in this area, I think that social landlords run a very significant risk that they could be or fall foul of the requirements in Awaab's Law, despite making best efforts to make sure they are in compliance. And that's simply down to the competence, knowledge and experience of the people, the surveyors and or contractors they are sending to look at damp and mould problems, to identify them and diagnose the root cause or causes, and then to fix them. Because to be clear, as Awaab's Law says, if you identify damp and mould in the property, you're required to fix it within certain time frames and then prevent reoccurrence. And of course, if you think that applying a DPC or doing a mould wash or using anti-mould paint is in any way permanent prevention of the root cause, then you do not understand the main root cause. It's very, very important to make sure that if you do identify structural defects, of course, they have to be fixed. But fixing an identified structural defect, like a DPC, for example, when you've got condensation and mould on windows, is rarely, if ever, the case. You may have a structural defect, but that's something separate to the main root cause. So I want to kind of leave it at that for now. I'm going to be making another video after this one to talk about environmental monitoring and sensors, and how those type of systems, which are more and more commonplace these days, can actually provide quite misleading data. So I look forward to talking to you on the next video.